Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show. As Africa becomes the new frontier for the internet and the prime destination for VC investment, how can policymakers ensure the market will police monopolisation and the misuse of personal data? I'll be speaking with investor and philanthropist Tommy Davies. And new research conducted by the Investor Network Fair suggests that the COVID-19 pandemic risks disrupting the animal protein sector. I'll be speaking with the company's executive director, Maria Lettini, about some of the findings. Then later, I'll be reporting on some of this week's noteworthy company news. Before those discussions, here's our business correspondent, Simon Pusey, with a breakdown of the biggest business stories trending in Britain this week. Simon, no surprises, Huawei back in the news. They've taken out a massive marketing campaign, really emphasising the importance of Britain continuing its business with them. 5G, will they, won't they?
Yeah, it's a really complex story, this one, because 5G is such an important thing and the government have really placed a lot of emphasis on it at the moment. So if we just look at 5G and what that means, really, it's basically Wi-Fi, but a kind of broadband speed, so sort of fixed line broadband speeds. And for a lot of the country, which maybe doesn't have the strongest Wi-Fi connection, this is really important. It's also really important for business. So the government has tried to, well, they've sort of eked out it as an industrial strategy for sectors including logistics and car making. They're saying 5G is the future and it's really, really important. And Huawei are going to play a big role, it looks like, at the moment, unless things change, in that in the UK. So at the moment, Boris Johnson has said that they can build Britain's 5G capabilities up to a cap of about 33% is as much as he's saying they're allowed to do. But the prospect of a full ban for Huawei in this whole project has increased in the last few days, with a branch of GCHQ, that's basically the intelligence agency, the sort of signals intelligence agency here in the UK, launching a review on the back of new US sanctions aimed at the company. So if we then move over to the US, which has accused the company pretty much of being in the pocket of the Chinese government, they say there's all sorts of security concerns, and that, yeah, basically that they are run by the Chinese government and the UK should not be entering into any kind of agreement like this with them. And State Secretary Mike Pompeo is saying things like, you know, Huawei is an extension of the Chinese Communist Party surveillance state, and that's something that the US have been alleging for years and years now. Back here, the company Vodafone, which is a big telecoms company here and around the world, the CFO there has warned that the UK would lose out massively on the race for 5G if they were not to work with Huawei. So Huawei obviously responding, saying that they are not in the pockets of the Chinese government, that it's a private company and 100% owned by private investors. So it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes, but at the moment, lots of arguments from all sides.
Gosh, we need a faster internet connection. That's one thing for sure, isn't it? Thank you, Simon. Here's some other business news from across the globe. This week, Malaysia resumed nearly all economic activity and allowed interstate travel as coronavirus restrictions imposed nearly 3 months ago were eased further to revive an economy battered by the pandemic. The Southeast Asian nation had partially lifted curbs in May amid a decline in new coronavirus cases. The number of new infections fell to single digits this week as more restrictions were removed.
I feel happy. I've been waiting for the government to give the SOP to open salons, and I am happy to work again because for almost 2 months we didn't get any sales. The customers were always asking, when can you open? Because it's been so long. So we had to explain to the customer. So now we are happy. We can start our business again.
As economists are learning more about the financial winners and losers during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's becoming increasingly clear that people working within the gig economy have lost a significant amount of income. Major gig economy employer Uber has struggled during the crisis. Its daily active users fell almost 40% year on year in March, and for the first quarter of 2020, the company recorded its lowest quarterly count of daily active users since mid-2017. Since the 90s, several local and international efforts have been made by governments, telecommunications firms and development organisations to improve internet infrastructure networks in Africa, and it's paid off. Over the years, several digital companies based on the continent have become major global contenders in the tech world. And now, Internet giants like Google and Facebook, based in Silicon Valley, are leading the race to invest in internet infrastructure in Africa. But what's at stake? Let's ask Tommy Davies, the renowned philanthropist and investor. I've got to say, in some sectors, not all, the phrase Africa's rising is no longer a throwaway statement. There are countless examples of huge sums of money being delivered to startups. I know you've been behind many of them. What has spurred this innovation from the continent and Nigeria over the past couple of years?
Well, if you go on SlideShare, you'll find a slide deck, 11 slides I put together in 2014, where I was trying to highlight how this set of clusters were becoming an ecosystem that is now known. The following year, I think I coined the phrase Silicon Lagoon, and I have a 2015 one. At that time, things were starting to ramp up, and I believe in 2015 we saw about 125 tech startups raise about 180, maybe 190 million dollars that year. But it marked the beginning, okay, of what you are talking about, because at that time we had Konga versus Jumia, we had Iroko TV, we had Hotels.ng all come to life. We had Paga already midstream at that point in time, and they were the genesis, along with the hubs. So you have CC Hub as a major player in this space. Everybody coming together with even Facebook, InterSwitch, Main One. It was just this coalescence that has started to build the momentum that we are witnessing now in 2020.
Absolutely, Titi. You took me back, actually, thinking of some of those companies and just how, you know, they were the first, they were the genesis, as you said. But I think we have to be honest when we talk about startups and digital infrastructure, because we're not there yet. Although we've definitely come a long way. There was a recent data, actually, and it says that Kenya and South Africa have ranked higher than Nigeria, once again, as being better, having a better ecosystem for startups. Where is Nigeria lacking? What do we need to improve? We can't just rely on the private sector, can we?
I beg to disagree with those reports, because everything I have still puts us in the lead. If you follow something like WeTracker, for example, or Disrupt Africa, take your pick, the numbers are there. So if we look at 2019, where I think inbound into Africa was 1.34 billion or something in that neck of the woods, Nigeria took nearly half of that. 663 million came to Nigeria, and then it was followed by Kenya and South Africa. So I'm not sure I buy into the paradigm that Kenya or South Africa have better environments than we do. Yes, we're struggling with quite a number of things. I'm not saying we're peaches and cream. I can name, infrastructure is a key challenge we have. Rules and regulations are another. Policy is another area where we could do much better than we're doing right now. But no, I don't think we're behind the other members of the diamond.
We're still a beacon, you say. One of the main reasons why I wanted to have this discussion with you is because of the kind of rush. There's certainly a race to build some underwater internet connections, particularly Google and Facebook seem to be going at it. We saw the pictures of Jack Ma in Nigeria a couple of months ago. And of course, Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg has been there, but there are concerns. We've seen this before, a rush to Africa, a rush to Nigeria. Sometimes contracts are signed. We're not looking at the small print. Are there going to be any concerns with mass misinformation, data security? Is it only the Silicon Valley giants that can bring internet to the whole of Africa? Is there nobody else within the continent that can do it?
Well, I don't know where those facts come from. Equiano, which is Google's under Google's cable system, which is it's the third private international cable one owned by Google, is still under construction. to Africa, which Facebook is participating in, is actually in collaboration with MTN Global, China Mobile, and quite a number of others. That is also under construction. But I mean, we've got Main One, which is the first private subsea cable company on the continent, and they're up, they're running, they're functioning. They're in Dakar.
Yeah, but you're a well-travelled, well-experienced man.
Yes.
Of course, you understand why some people would have concerns with the infrastructural development, because we've seen it with the Chinese. Yes, they may be building several institutions for Africa and Nigeria, but at what cost? Yes, we do want there to be a digital explosion in Nigeria, but the Silicon Valley giants that are rushing to Nigeria will only be rushing there if they know they're going to get something out of it, and we want to make sure we're on an equal peg.
Well, that's why you've got to do what we're doing, which is stand up and get counted. Okay, this is not a child's game, and nobody's going to say, "Oh, thank you very much. Here's the way." You've got to stand up, sew together local. What we're doing, let me speak a bit about that. Is we believe that local investors need to participate in this. You've just raised the example of subsea. I could raise the example of renewable energy is another area we're seeing this. And then with COVID-19, we're going to start to see it in medical technologies. Our local investors need to participate in the franchise to understand that technology is now driving the world. And because Africa is still the greenfield site, okay? And the easiest way to explain that when I say greenfield is for you to look at what's happened with mobile. The reason mobile innovation is happening in Africa is because Africa never had fixed line telephony. So we came into telephony when mobile technologies actually came into being. The resultant effect is everybody still marvels at M-Pesa. This is over 10 years later. M-Pesa is doing gangbusters in Kenya as a mobile payment platform. There are features and functions of my mobile platform here in Lagos, Nigeria, that Lloyds Bank in London doesn't have till today.
Can you bring it over with you?
Those kinds of innovations around mobile is why everybody's excited.
Absolutely.
Is because they know, okay? And what I'm saying is, look, anywhere in the world is fair game.
Anywhere in the world is fair game, Mr. Davies. And, you know, you're very well known for all of your philanthropic efforts and your mega investments. I've got to ask you quickly before we leave about investments and how COVID-19 may have changed your way of thinking. Do you worry about the future of startups? Should they be worried because so many people are keeping their purses sealed through fear of, you know, what the new normal is likely to be?
Well, I like throwing facts at people. We just closed 2 days ago. If you go on Twitter, I think it's there. We just closed the startup deal 2 days ago. The negotiation started in March, post-COVID, and the opportunity the startup is looking at is a post-COVID opportunity that takes an unfortunate advantage of some of the dynamics in our environment. The point I'm trying to make is there will always be opportunities. It's a question of whether or not the startups are addressing those opportunities and the investors recognize the potential of those opportunities.
Absolutely. Tommy Davis, it's so lovely to have you on Channels Business Global. I'm very fortunate because I know you're a busy man, and hopefully you've got some time off camera to talk to me about some investments you can be making in Britain. Coming up on Channels Business Global, I'll be speaking with the Executive Director of the Investor Network Fair about their recent findings, which suggest that the COVID-19 pandemic may disrupt the animal protein sector. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be joined by the Executive Director of the Investor Network Fair. But before then, here's some company news for you. Zara owner Inditex booked its first quarterly loss on Wednesday after the coronavirus crisis forced it to shut almost 90% of its stores in the 3 months from February to April. Inditex, the cash-rich owner of other brands such as Massimo Dutti and Bershka, said the rapid drop in sales had slowed, with sales at constant currencies falling 34% in the June 2nd to 8th period. British fashion retailers Monsoon and Accessorize will close 35 stores, make 545 staff redundant and seek rent cuts for remaining shops as part of a restructuring led by its founder to survive the COVID-19 crisis. Administrators from business advisory firm FRP were appointed late on Tuesday and immediately sold the company's business and assets to Adena Brands, a company ultimately controlled by Peter Simon. Finnair launched a share sale this week to raise €500 million from its existing investors, almost as much as its current market value as it seeks to strengthen its finances to cope with the coronavirus crisis. Airlines across the world have been scrambling to raise cash and slash costs after lockdowns to contain the virus pandemic brought global air travel to a virtual halt, and has warned it could take 2 to 3 years for air travel to recover to 2019 levels. Now, over to our next discussion. Research conducted by the investor network FAIR suggests that the COVID-19 pandemic risks disrupting the animal protein sector. Global meat giants like Brazil's JBS and Venky's in India, both suppliers to high street names such as McDonald's, are among 44 firms criticised by investors for their inability to prevent the emergence of a new zoonotic disease such as COVID-19. The data finds that in the wake of the enormous economic and human health shocks caused by COVID, 73% of the world's largest listed animal protein producers, collectively worth over $220 billion, grade as high risk in its pandemic ranking. To take us through more of the findings, I'm now being joined by FAIR's Executive Director, Maria Latini. Why has livestock become such a precarious commodity, as your report suggests?
Well, I think we've had decades of livestock being a precarious commodity, to be honest. Now we're talking about industrialized systems here, and really these systems have been optimized for efficiency, and they're really starting to prove that they're not resilient in these types of crisis situations.
As soon as the pandemic reached a global scale, there were a lot of, especially ministers here in Britain, saying there should be a ban on wet markets. Do you think we'll be seeing that anytime soon?
I think you're going to see a lot of scrutiny of how we are producing animals across the board for a number of different uses, for the food system, for, in the case of Asia, perhaps even for medicinal purposes, and as it should be, producing animals in mass without proper regulatory framework, without safeguards in place to ensure that we're not disrupting natural habitats, bringing animals closer to people, and making us susceptible to bacteria and virus that our bodies have never encountered in the past, as we've seen unfold with COVID, is a huge risk. So I think you're going to see a lot of reflection on how animals particularly are being produced for a number of different uses, but particularly for the food system.
Absolutely. One of the solutions offered in your report is a shift to plant-based proteins. And no surprises, there are always winners and losers in a downturn. One of the winners is these kind of plant-based protein diets. Do you think a long-term shift to this way of eating is inevitable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're already seeing it happening around the world in developed and developing markets, right? So it was happening even before this crisis. And now inevitably, which, maybe unfortunately or unfortunately for consumers and unfortunately for the meat producers, when there's no meat on the shelves, it gives consumers a perfect opportunity to try out plant-based products that perhaps they hadn't previously. And so these plant-based products don't have the same negative environmental impacts as these meat-based products. Their workers and working conditions, they obviously do not have the same risks. They don't have slaughter lines with workers working elbow to elbow. So they're completely different conditions that offer opportunities for consumers and investors and the market in general to move into a type of protein that is better for the planet, better for consumers, and will help safeguard long-term value of portfolios.
Some would say they'd be tasteless, though, Maria, but then I suppose that one is up for debate. I've got to ask you about the developing world, because quality protein, believe it or not, isn't available to everybody. I was surprised when I was doing my research that Nigeria is one of the countries where protein deficiency is a huge issue. So how, when you're trying to urge, policymakers and money makers to try and put some sort of legislation in place, that it doesn't have a negative effect on the global south?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and it's something that we shouldn't be overlooking, right? Today, developing countries overconsume protein, right? And we're talking now about these big industrialized producers that operate not only in places like the U.S., but also in developing countries. And, in many countries, like Nigeria, the government and the economy is very much linked to agriculture. So these are very important and in many cases contentious issues. They help support local economies. But what we do have to take into account is that we need to start to see a shift around safety and security. And I think COVID has just opened up this Pandora's box for these discussions. The investment community, over the past 5 or 10 years has been firmly looking for ways to help spur investment in developing markets, to help ensure food security. And I know development finance institutions are very focused in this area. And in many cases, their work with local smallholder farms has been quite progressive. And we've seen shifts in how they're producing meat, fish, and dairy that in many cases one might see is slightly even more progressive than what you see in these large industrialized operations in developed markets. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. But what we do need in the short term is governments to come in to safeguard the health of workers, to make sure that there are loans so that farmers and workers in the slaughter lines are able to continue working, and to make sure that there's food on the table during these times of crisis.
Absolutely, and the issue is not going away, so it's definitely one that has to be tackled. We're running out of time, Maria, but I've got to ask you an important question. How have the investors reacted to this research?
I think it's been overwhelmingly supportive, right? These again are risk factors that the investors in our $20 trillion network have been focusing on since our inception in 2016 and obviously before. But this piece of work helps to highlight the convergence of these issues and the need for further discussion around the resilience of this industry. So I think this will help change the dialogue with many CEOs of big animal ag companies, right? And it does absolutely pose the question, are they too big to fail? And should the consolidation of this sector continue? And what needs to be done in order to safeguard our global protein supply chain?
Absolutely. Such important research, and hopefully, those who do need to listen will start listening to you. Maria Lessony, the Executive Director of the Investor Network Fair, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.